I think the physical evidence that we've seen from video and photographs of the scene of the impact, it just does not make plausible the idea that this was a munition delivered from an aircraft in an airstrike. It shows there's a very small impact crater. If it had been a bomb dropped by an aircraft, the crater would have been massive. It's not plausible that that number of casualties would have been taken at that site by a blast radius, which would have been relatively small. If there had actually been 471 killed, and I'm not disputing that maybe there were people killed there, there would have been a huge mass of corpses. Presumably Hamas and others would have seen an interest in displaying those for the international media. But I also think that there couldn't have been that kind of death toll without a building collapse with bodies buried under the rubble, and then there would have been video or photographs of bodies there would have been a massive recovery type of effort that would presumably have been shared with the international media, and there would be some evidence of it. But given the size of the impact crater and the limited damage around it, there's just no way that it could have resulted in such a death toll or that kind of destruction. And the buildings around the site are practically
right. Well, because
untouched.
the photograph that we've seen of after the bombing is a bombed-out car park, lots of destroyed, burned cars, but the building appears to be fully intact. And I've spoken to people here who know that hospital, who've been to that hospital, and they say that is the structure. It is still standing.
Yeah, it just doesn't match with what, for example, the U.S. military and our Iraqi security forces became all too familiar with in terms of massive bombings with large death tolls in Baghdad or Mosul or elsewhere in Iraq. Just the impact crater would have been enormous.
And in Gaza, we see destroyed buildings, and it doesn't look anything like that.
Yeah. So I think it's a pretty straightforward question. So I think actually probably then the getting the story out there, and I'm not trying to minimize the damage to civilian infrastructure in Gaza or anything like that. That's not my place to judge. It does appear to me, though, it has the feel to me of an information operation that probably the Iranian regime and Hamas were ready to exploit and looking for an opportunity. And I think it's probably part of a broader war strategy, a campaign strategy by the Iranian regime as part of their strategy to escalate the conflict beyond Gaza, as they're potentially showing that they have the potential capability to do in Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and elsewhere.
Well, I mean, the US supplies military aid to an awful lot of countries in the region, Egypt, Jordan and others. The US has said that its own intelligence suggests that this was a misfired rocket. It corroborates Israel's version of events. I mean, do you think there's any way that the United States will be able to get its allies in the region to admit that it is promoting a falsehood?
Well, probably not, because I think, the political currents are very much in the Arab capitals, I think, are very much in the opposite direction. And the Iranian regime and its proxies are helping to push them in that direction, making it very, very dangerous, I think, for regional governments to sort of to be clearer about the facts of what happened. However, I also think that this conflict has a very high risk of expanding far beyond Gaza and becoming a regional conflict that draws others in. And it could be that in a week or two, that the provenance of what happened at the hospital is a distant memory anyway, because we'll all be facing a broader war that the supreme leader of Iran has decided to launch right now. And I firmly believe that he has taken a decision to escalate a regional conflict right now, first by using the Hamas assault into southern Israel as the opening salvo in that conflict.
Well, and I wanted to ask you, Joel, because you are the former envoy to Syria, there has been some reports in the last 24 hours of attacks on US forces in Iraq and Syria by Iranian proxies. Do you have any information on that?
Well, only what's out there in the media, but I'm not surprised. I think you see the Supreme Leader and the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, are displaying the tools that they have at their disposal all around the region. They were able to deploy a Hezbollah organized riot outside the gates of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. They fired suicide drones at our troops in Iraq and probably in Syria. They're turning out mobs in many places, and I think that they are showing okay, United States, okay, Israel, if you are not going to do what we demand and slow down or halt the offensive into Gaza, then this is where we're prepared to act next, as well as of course the strikes that are coming across the border from Lebanon into Israel for the past several days.
So are you pleased with the US response so far, sending enormous military support to the Eastern Mediterranean already? Can we see some of that going to closer to Iran, perhaps, going to the Strait of Hormuz?
That I don't know. I mean, that's a place of direct confrontation. You know, the Supreme Leader and the IRGC tend to shy away from direct confrontation. So far, they've used militia proxies everywhere. So it would be quite dangerous for them to try to challenge the U.S. Navy in the Strait of Hormuz. I think they know that. So I think they'd be less inclined to do that because they want to have some deniable proxy sock puppet that they can use and hope that the sock puppet then will absorb any retaliation as opposed to them. But yes, it was an essential move for Secretary of Defense Austin to send the 2 carrier strike groups to the Eastern Mediterranean. That's essential because there needed to be a signal to the Iranian regime that the United States would be willing to respond if there were further Iranian directed attacks against U.S. interests in expanding the conflict to places like the U.S. Embassy in Beirut or our troops in Syria. So it was essential to try to restore that deterrent.
A very volatile situation. Joel Rayburn, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yep, my pleasure.